Hello and welcome to the next video in my Arcadian Shepherdess sewing series. To make these stays, I used Redthreaded 1780s front lacing stays pattern. I have a previous video where I made a mock-up of the process. In these stays, I use 2 layers of soft herringbone coutil for my strength layers, as well as a fashion fabric of a lovely brocade, which I think worked really well. It's an amazing pattern, and I'm really excited to be able to share this process with you.
This part 1 video is on the preparation of the pieces. We will cover preparing the paper pattern pieces, cutting out the fabric, marking the pieces such as the notches and the bone channels, flatlining the brocade to the coutil, and stay stitching the tabs. I started by cutting out the paper pattern pieces, as I did for the mock-up, only this time I cut them out twice. For the front and the back, I taped the 2 pieces together at the centre front and centre back respectively, as I want to cut the fabric such that both coutil layers are one piece, without needing to cut on the fold. Similarly for the stomacher, I cut 2 versions of the pattern, leaving a margin on one half. Then I join the 2 pieces together so that the stomacher will be able to be cut out in one without being cut on the fold. Then I cut out 2 straps and all the pieces were prepared. Next, I roughly laid out the paper pattern pieces on the coutil. And cut off the amount needed. I pressed the coutil with steam and then folded it neatly in half and pressed on the fold. I also heavily steamed the brocade twice, as I was following the general advice of treat your fabric as you will the garment, and I did not pre-wash the brocade as the stays will not be washed. I had hoped this would be sufficient to account for shrinkage, but as you will see, it was not. Next, I pinned the pattern pieces to the coutil. I laid out the pieces, then ensured they were on grain by using a long ruler matched up with the lines on the cutting board. I measured and pinned 2 points on the grain line of each piece, then added other pins to hold the pattern flat. Then I cut out the coutil. Note that I'm not cutting up all the way up the tabs at the bottom in order to minimize fraying due to handling during the sewing process. I steam the front pieces on the fold. I warm them with the iron first, then finger press, then iron. And I repeat this for the back pieces as well. I labelled the front pieces on the wrong side, writing front wrong side on each outer piece and front lining wrong side on the lining. Weighing the paper pattern down with weights, I used a tracing wheel and graphite paper to trace the notches and lines onto the wrong sides of the outer pieces. I repeat the process for the back pieces, where the lines go around the tabs. And I go through the process for the side pieces as well. Note that there are 4 separate pieces, as these are not on the fold. Now for the boning channels. Starting with the stomacher, the boning channels are marked onto the right sides of the lining pieces. As I did in the mock-up, I marked the half with the paper pattern right side up first of all. Then you followed the perforations when marking out the second half. I also marked the boning channels on the side pieces. The front lining pieces. And then the back lining pieces. So here we can see all the marked boning channels. I laid out the brocade wrong side up and pinned it down to hold it in place. Thankfully, you can see the pattern from the wrong side and you can see the cutting board lines through the fabric as well. I laid out the couture pieces over the top, being careful to get the swirls of the pattern where I wanted them, and pinned the couture in place. I was rather nervous, as while I have had some success with fusing on a fashion fabric, this was my first time flatlining. I turned my attention to the first front piece, pinning it securely to the brocade, and then cutting with plenty of seam allowance. I stitch about 1/4 inch from the edge of the couture to attach the brocade. And I overlocked the edge of the brocade that would be folded into the facing. I press the front fold and cool it under weights. Then pin. Then I stitch down the front edge from the wrong side, and this will form one side of the front bone channel. Actually starting to put together the stays. It's pretty, so exciting. However, I pressed it again and it all puckered up. No! So it was time to unpick the top line of stitches with a seam ripper. I pressed it again, let it cool, and then re-stitched that top line. For the second front piece, I tried a different method. I firstly cut 2 inches from the front edge, then cut the fabric away from up above and pinned it loosely. I pressed the brocade and it did indeed shrink, so I moved the pins in and pressed it again and repeated this process until it was all nice and flat. Then I flat-lined the second front piece together. I pressed the front over and stitched down the centre front. I trimmed away the fabric at the side and overlocked that front edge at 3 centimetres to match the first front edge. Then folding all layers down, I stitched close to the centre front along the front edge. And with that, the 2 front panels have been flat-lined. Hurrah! I really love the fabric. Such shine. So pretty. Now onto the rest of the pieces, broadly cutting out, then pinning down, starting with the straps, then the first back piece, and the stomacher, the second back piece, and then the side pieces. I steam pressed the pieces, adjusting the pins as required. The time had come for the rest of the flat lining. I started with the straps. And then continued onto the stomacher, and the side pieces, during which I incorporated stay-stitching the tabs. This is an important step. The stitches will be visible on the right side of material, so we'll be able to follow them later when binding the tabs. Then flatlining and stay stitching the tabs on the back pieces. After overlocking, folding and pressing in the back edge, as I did for the front, I stitched closely along the centre back. Looking from the right side of the fabric, you can just see the stay stitches coming through. Unlike in the mock-up, I didn't want them to be too obvious on the real stays. And so all the pieces have now been prepared. In part 2 of this series, I will work through the assembly of the stays and the sewing of the bone channels. I hope you can join me then.